Hello everyone, welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Aleph, and we are continuing to learn Hilchos Tzitzis. In today's share, we'll be learning in Mirz Hashem Daf Lamed Amud Aleph. We have a bit of leftover work to be done on Chav Tes Amud Beis, so let's get started right away. We pick up on Chav Tes Amud Beis, Siman Yud Ches, Sif Gimel, 3 lines off the bottom. In the middle of the line, Chav Tes Amud Beis. Says the Mechaber, from what time can we make a bracha on tzitzis in the morning? Beginning with what time? There's a shear. At what point in time can we make that bracha? Says the Mechaber, when you could look at the tzitzit strings and you can discern the difference in color between the talis strings, the blue strings, and the white strings. Now, of course, nowadays we don't have talis, so what does that mean for us? We're going to see shortly. Says the Ramah, let's say you put on a talis already at Alois HaShachar. Alois HaShachar is certainly before the Zman of Mishayakir. Alois HaShachar is dawn, and that comes before it's light enough outside to be able to discern the difference between Techelis and Lavan. So what happens if you put on a talis already earlier? Says the Ramah, Yesh Oyrim de Mavarech Alav, there are those that say that you can make a bracha even before Mishayakir. And the Ramah says, V'chei Noyagin, the Ramah says that is our minig, that we do make a bracha in extenuating circumstances if we put on the talis before Mishayakir, but we'll see that at greater detail in the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Ramah Vaiter, let's say you put on the talis even before Alois. Kigain, for example, b'slichas. Let's say when you go to slichas on Erev Rosh Hashanah, you're beginning slichas way before Alois in some places. So what happens if you put on the talis before Alois? Says the Ramah, you should not make a bracha. And when the day becomes light, when you reach the Zman of Mishayakir, yemashmesh by finger the tzitzis, fill the tzitzis in your hand, v'yavarech, and make the bracha then. Okay, so we said quite a bit over here. Let's just remember that the Mechaber began over here discussing the proper Zman of tzitzis, not the Zman of tzitzis, but when you could already make a bracha on tzitzis, and the Mechaber began by saying that the Zman is Mishayakir. What does Mishayakir mean? Literally, it means when you could recognize. When you could recognize what? Said the Mechaber, when you could recognize and discern the difference between the Techelis strings and the white strings. Says the Mishnah Berurah's contest Mishayakir. V'hu hazman, and that is the same time, di mishayira es chaveroi harogal imay ktsas, if you happen to see a friend of yours, but not a close friend, an acquaintance, rogal imay ktsas, you have some shaykhis to him, so he's an acquaintance, somebody you know from shul. Berichok arba amos, and he's standing 4 amos away from you. V'yakirenu, and you could recognize him. Where else do we see this man? Says the Chavetz Chaim. We're going to see this same Zman mentioned later on in Hilchos Kriyas Shema. It brings us down from the Beis Yosef b'Siman Nun Ches b'Shem Arash. This is one time. So we have the same time is identified in 2 different ways. One is Mishayakir bein Tcheles Sheba l'Lavan Sheba. That's what the Mechaber gives us here in the context of Hilchos Tzitzis. You want to know when you can make a bracha on the tzitzits? Look at the tzitzits. Is it light enough outside that you could tell the difference between the blue strings and the white strings? Then you could already make a bracha on the tzitzits. We don't have tchelis. So the Chavetz Chaim gives us a different description of the same Zman taken from Hilchos Kriyas Shema. What is that? If there's an acquaintance of yours, not a close friend, but an acquaintance of yours, and he's standing daled amos away, approximately 7 to 8 feet away, and it's light enough outside that you can already recognize him, that's already the Zman that you can make a bracha on tzitzits. And the Chavetz Chaim concludes, Ois Katan Tes, Ayin Sham Ubibir Agra Bin Yanenu. Ois Katan Yud. The Ramah said, what happens if you put on a talis before this Zman? So you're putting on a talis after Alois, after dawn, but it is not yet Mishayakir. So the Ramah said, Yesh Oyrim, there are those that say, the Mavarech Alav, that you could already make a bracha on the talis if it's after alois. And the Ramah said, V'chein noyagin, that is our minute. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Yud, Ayin b'Biur Agra, he sends us to the Biur Agra, Shepasak, who rules, Kedas HaShulchan Aruch. He rules like the Shulchan Aruch, that no, you could only make a bracha after Misha Yakir. You cannot make a bracha after Alois, before Misha Yakir. Pri Megadim Kasav, the Pri Megadim writes, Im Hashah Dechuka, if it's pressing circumstances, HaMekel Lahadiach Me'alois HaShachar Ve'elech, somebody who does put on a talis before Misha Yakir, but after Alois and makes a bracha, Ein Goyarin Bay, you shouldn't object to what he's doing. It is certainly very proper, to wait to make the bracha until the time of Misha Yakir. This seems to be the opinion of the El Yerabba. Says the Chavetz Chaim, it appears to him that b'di'evet, even if you made a bracha before Alois, lo yachzer v'yavarech, you should not repeat the bracha. Why? You made the bracha before Alois. We don't see anybody here who says that the proper zman is before Alois. We have that preferably Misha Yakir. Said the Ramah, if it's after Alois, but it's not Misha Yakir yet, okay, nu shas atchak, you can make the bracha then, v'chein noyagin. Now we're saying, the Chavetz Chaim says, b'di'evet, even if you made the bracha before Alois, so it's certainly night, you shouldn't make the bracha over again. You know why? Explains the Chavetz Chaim, the Shema Halacha Kaharash, because yesterday's famous machlokes, the Rambam and the Rosh, maybe we pass it like the Rosh, the Ksus Yoim Balayla Chayiv. Remember, the Rosh holds that if you wear a beged yoim, and a talis is considered a beged yoim, if you wear a beged yoim at night, it's chayiv in tzitzis. The Rosh holds that Laila Lavzman tzitzis means a beged Laila is not chayiv in tzitzis. But Laila, if you're wearing a beged yoim at night, you're chayiv in tzitzis. So that according to the Rosh, you could make a bracha on a talis even at midnight. So, b'di'eved, if you made the bracha before Alois, don't go ahead and repeat the bracha. If you repeat the bracha, you're actually risking a bracha of Atola. According to the Rosh, it would be a bracha of Atola. Then the Ramah concluded, and the Ramah said, if you put on a talis before Alois, like by Slichas, you put on a talis before Alois, said the Ramah, what should you do? Wear the talis, and then when the Zman of Misha Yakir comes, finger the tzitzits and make a bracha. Now, this is taken from a Tashbatz. And if you look up the Tashbatz actually seems to say that you should be memashmesh in the talis. So the Chavetz Chaim comes along in Ois Katan Yud Aleph and he says, Yemashmesh boy. If you notice, the Ramah does not say Yemashmesh betalis. He doesn't say Yemashmesh betzitzits. He says Yemashmesh boy. Says the Chavetz Chaim, what does boy mean? Ratzaloymar b'tzitzi yosav. You should be memashmesh in the tzitzits when you make the bracha. Why are you being memashmesh in the tzitzits? So we remember this came up earlier in other cases where the Mechaber told us this concept of being memashmesh b'tzitzits, and we learned, the Mishnah Berurah over there said, the point is that when you're memashmesh b'tzitzits, it's somewhat like you're putting them on now. You're being machshiv them now. So it's appropriate to make a bracha. I would just mention over here that the Kabbalah that I have from my Rebbe, Reb Reuven soll sein gesund und stark, Reb Reuven Feinstein soll sein gesund und stark, is that the Zman of Misha Yakir, he doesn't put on a talis before Misha Yakir, certainly doesn't make a bracha before Misha Yakir, and it's not the Zman of Misha Yakir that you find printed on the Zmanim charts. When he wants to know if it's Misha Yakir, it's physical Misha Yakir, like the descriptions that we have over here. The descriptions that we are being given are dependent on how light it is outside. Can you discern the difference between Tchelis and Lavan? Can you recognize an acquaintance of yours, Barichot Dalad Amos? So you have to go outside and see how light it is. So Reb Reuven will open up the window, stick his head out, look outside, and try to see, is it Misha Yakir? If it's a very rainy, cloudy day, then Misha Yakir is actually later. because it doesn't get light on time. Very often, Rebbe will ask me, do me a favor, go outside, see if it's Mishiakir. And I'll go out the door and take a look and come back and tell them if it's Mishiakir or not. So it's a physical siman, which makes sense, because back in the day, they didn't have fancy watches or phones that had the Zmanim on them, and they had no Zmanim charts. So it was something, it's like Tzeis HaKoichavim, right? The Zman of Tzeis HaKoichavim is when the stars come out, right? Gimel Koichavim Beinonim, 3 middle-sized stars. That's, you go outside, you look up at the sky, and you see, could you see them? It always reminds me of the time that a bacher came into Ruvain and asked him about the shir on a piece of cake, if you have to make an alamichyo or not. And Ruvain said, well, is it a kazayas? So the guy said, well, I don't know. What do you mean is it a kazayas? So Ruvain said, okay, is it the size of an olive? And the guy was like, what does kazayas have to do with the size of an olive? Or when my nephew asked my sister-in-law about the store in Flatbush, Pomegranate, he said, why did they name a fruit after a store? So Kazayis means an olive. Now you have to know what it means, because it's not just the size of an olive, because in the cake there's sugar and there's eggs and there's oil and there's everything else besides the flour. So again, you have to know what it means, a kazayis. But a kazayis means the size of an olive. Kebeya means the size of an egg. So Tzeis HaKoichavim means when you could look up at the sky and see the stars. And over here, Mishayakir means a physical Mishayakir. Okay, let's move on now to Lamed of an Aleph, Siman Yud Tes. Zman Birkas Tzitzis. We could continue discussing the Zman of the bracha of Tzitzis, but not the Zman in the context that we had here in Siman Yud Ches. The context of Siman Yud Ches is, when is the Zman that you're obligated in Tzitzis, and therefore you can make a bracha. Now we're talking about, when precisely do you make the bracha on Tzitzis? Do you make it when you make the Tzitzis? Do you make it when you put the Tzitzis on? When is the appropriate time to make a bracha on Tzitzis? Zman Birchas Tzitzis Ubaybe Seifim. Here we have 2 Seifim. Says the Mechaber Sif Aleph. And this is going to be familiar to us from a couple of days ago, I think it was. Says the Mechaber, Tzitzis Chayvas Gavrohu. The Tzitzis are an obligation on the person. V'loi Chayvas Mona. It's not an obligation on the beged. What does that mean? Explains the Mechaber, Shekol Zman She'enoi Loive Talis, so long as you are not wearing the garment. You have a garment that has daled kanflis. You have a 4-cornered garment. You have a beautiful talis. It's in your closet. As long as you are not wearing that beged, it is not chayiv in tzitzits. You could have as many 4-cornered garments in your closet as you want, and you're not mechuyev to put tzitzits on them, so long as they're just in your closet. So, kol zman she'eino loive shatalis, as long as you are not wearing the talis, potter mitzitzits. The garment is potter from tzitzits. So the chiyuv of tzitzits is not on the garment. It's not a chiyuv that the garment has to have tzitzits on it. If it was, then you would be mechuyev to have tzitzits on any 4-cornered garment that you may possess. And to have a 4-cornered garment without tzitzits on it would be to be mevatel and aseh. I have a beged for a talis cotton that I bought many years ago, and I never had a chance to put tzitzits on it, so it's sitting in my drawer. It's a beautiful beged of dal kanfis. It has no tzitzits. I'm not mechuyev to put tzitzits on it. If I want to wear it, then I have to put tzitzits on it before I wear it, because it's a chayvas gavra. It's a chiyuv on me. It's not a chiyuv on the tzitzits. Now, earlier we saw where we said that tzitzits is not a chayvas gavra. So the Mishnah Berurah explained it is a chayvas gavra and it's not a chayvas gavra. What did we mean earlier when we said it's not a chayvas gavra? That means that there's no chiyuv on the gavra, there's no chiyuv on a person to go get a beged of dalit kanfais so that he could be mekayim the mitzvah of tzitzits, the way there is a chiyuv to go get tefillin so you could be mekayim the mitzvah of tefillin, or to get dalit minim so you could be mekayim the mitzvah of lulav. There's no chiyuv to go get tzitzits to be mekayim the mitzvah of tzitzits. Nowadays, Klal Yisrael was mekabel, and it's very serious that we do not go dalit amos without tzitzits. And we are told that somebody who's makbid on tzitzits be'idon derischa, at a time when chas v'chalila the Rebbeinu Shalom is angry, such a person is protected from einish. But a person who's not nizer in the mitzvah of tzitzis is not protected from an oynish. So it's very serious to go get a beged of dal kanfas and make sure you wear tzitzis every minute, every day. But it's not a chiyuv. That's what it means that tzitzis is not a chayvas gavra. It's a kula. We're not mechuyev to go get a garment so that we should be mekayim the mitzvah tzitzis. But it is a chayvas gavra to the extent that it's a chiyuv on the person, not a chiyuv on the garment. The garment could be in the closet without tzitzits. When you want to put it on, you got to go put tzitzits on it. Continues the Mechaber, the second line. Ulefikach. Therefore, since this is the proper understanding of the mitzvah of tzitzis, ulefikach, therefore, einoi mevarech al asiyas hatzitzits. We don't make a bracha when we make tzitzits. When you have a beged of dal kanfas, and you go and you get strings and you put them through the beged and you go and you tie them on and you make the coils and everything else, you don't make a bracha to make tzitzits, because you have no chiyuv to make tzitzits. It's only when you want to go wear a beged of dal kanfas. When you want to go wear a beged of dal kanfas, it has to have tzitzits on it. So then we make a bracha when we put it on l'hisatef patzitzits. But we don't make a bracha when we make tzitzis lasois tzitzits, because that's not a mitzvah. You got to do it l'shem mitzvah. You have to do it l'shem mitzvah tzitzits. When you put the strings in, it has to be l'shem mitzvah tzitzits. When you make the knots, l'shem mitzvah tzitzits. But the asiyah itself is not a mitzvah to make a bracha on, because you know what? You're not being a mekayim a mitzvah. You're not wearing the beged, so you're not being a mekayim the mitzvah when you tie the tzitzits on. So that's why we don't make a bracha when we make tzitzits. She'ein mitzvah ela b'levishasai. Because the mitzvah is only the wearing. And we're going to discuss this more. It's a fascinating topic. Says the Mishnah Berurah over here, and that's what I explained to you, that in one sense it is a chayvas gavra, and in one sense it is not a chayvas gavra. Ois cotton base, potter means tzitzits. As long as you have the tzitzits in the closet, they're potter. As long as you have the four-cornered garment in the closet, it's potter from tzitzits. And now the Mishnah Berurah is going to explain that. Excuse me. Okay. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ais Cotton Bays. Where do we get this from? How do we know that it's a chayvas gavra and not a chayvas mana? And the Mishnah Berurah is going to show us that there's actually a pasuk, and we say it twice a day in Kriyishma, that sounds very much like the asiyah of the tzitzits is a mitzvah. Says the Mishnah Berurah Cotton Bays. Afal gav diksiv va'asu lahem tzitzis akanfei b'gdeihem. What are you saying, Kriyishma? The Rebbe Shem told Moshe Rabbeinu, tell Bnei Yisrael, va'asu lahem tzitzits, they shall make tzitzits for themselves al kanfei b'gdeihem, on the corners of their garments. So it sounds like you have a four-cornered garment in your closet. Go right now, you have a mitzvah, say, go put tzitzits on it. Explains the Mishnah Berurah, no. Afal gav diksiv va'asu lahem tzitzis akanfei b'gdeihem. Nevertheless, there's another pasuk. Since there's another pasuk that says, Gedilim tasalach, you should make tzitzis fringes, al arba kanfos kisusacha asher techaseba, on the four corners of your garment that you are clothing yourself with. So, mashma davka kishebiskaseba. That pasuk tells us that no, the mitzvah is not on the garment that's in your closet. The mitzvah is when you go to wear a garment, then you have to put the tzitzits on it. Okay, let's go weiter. Ois cotton gimel in the Mishnah Berurah. What did the Mechaber say? The Mechaber said on the second line, Ulefikach, since this is the proper understanding of the mitzvah of tzitzits, Einoi mevarech al asiyas hatzitzits. Now, this is very catchy. There's two different ways that you could read the Mechaber. One way is, you could say it like this. Maybe the Mechaber is coming to address the proper nusach of the bracha. There are two nuschais of the bracha that we are familiar with. One is when married men, we go to shul, we make a bracha on our talis. We say, Asher kedishanu b'mitzvah tzivanu lihisatef patzitzits, to wrap ourselves in the tzitzits. What do most people make on a talis cotton? Asher kedishanu b'mitzvah tzivanu al mitzvahs tzitzits. So those are two nuschais that we are familiar with. Many people say al mitzvahs tzitzis on the talis cotton. We learned this earlier because they don't make atifa. They don't really wrap themselves with the talis cotton, so that it's inappropriate to say lehisatef. They say al mitzvahs. We learned that really you could make lehisatef on the talis cotton also. We learned the gra. The gra says that you should make ituf. You actually should wrap yourself with the talis cotton. If you remember, I told you, when I was a bacher, when I didn't wear a talis gadol, and I only wore a talis cotton, I followed the gra. I made atifa with the talis cotton. Or even better, over the left side, like that. So I made atifa with the talis cotton, and I made a bracha lehisatef batzitzits on the talis cotton. But nevertheless, those are the two nuschais that we're familiar with. Now maybe the Mechaber is coming over here, Siman Yutesef Aleph, to tell us, why the nusach is lehisatef batzitzits and not al asiyas tzitzits? The reason is because the mitzvah isn't the asiyah. The mitzvah is the atifa. The mitzvah is the levisha. That's one way you could learn the mechaber. The other way you could learn the mechaber is, so if you learned the mechaber that way, it would be ulefikach. Therefore, einay mevarech al asiyas tzitzits. We don't make a bracha asher kedishanu b'mitzvayis v'tzivanu la'asos tzitzis. Instead, we make a bracha lehisatef batzitzis. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no, that's not the right way to learn the mechaber. The right way to learn the mechaber is ulefikach einay mevarech al asiyas tzitzis. Because this is the proper understanding of the mitzvah of tzitzits, that you mekayim the mitzvah with the levisha and not with the making of the tzitzits, therefore we do not make a bracha when we make tzitzits. You might have thought that you should make a bracha when you make tzitzits. Kamash balan, that we do not make a bracha when we make tzitzits. I'm sorry, you see, I just got distracted. The reason I got distracted is because I just realized that for some reason I'm not generating a sound file on my computer, but I am generating a sound file on my iPhone. Baruch Hashem, I have my backup. Baruch Hashem, I have my backup sound, but why do I not have sound? Why do I not have sound? Oh, the sound just went on. It wasn't on before, but I have my backup sound file, so I'll have to use that. Okay, in any case, so let's see the Mishnah Berurah over here inside Ois Cotton Gimel. The Mechaber said, "Ulefikach, therefore, einay mevarech al asiyas hatzitzits." We don't make a bracha on making tzitzis. Ritzoynoi loymar. Remember what I've told you many times. Whenever the Mishnah Berurah says Ritzoynoi loymar, that it's the Mechaber's will to say, what the Mechaber is trying to say is, that means that there's a question of how to learn the Mechaber. And the Mishnah Berurah is telling us the proper way to learn the Mechaber, and I just explained to you what the two possible ways are. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ritzoynoi loymar, what the Mechaber wants to say is, what does he mean? You don't make a bracha al asiyas hatzitzits be'es hatalosan b'habeged. You do not make a bracha when you tie the tzitzits onto the beged, because that's not a mitzvah. The mitzvah is the levisha, not the tying of the tzitzits. Ella, rather, when do you make the bracha? Later on, when you have the tzitzits prepared, when you have the beged with the tzitzits intact on it, mevarech lehisatef. Then when you go to put it on, you make a bracha lehisatef batzitzits. Now, the Mishnah Berurah discusses an interesting case. I just explained to you that you don't make a bracha when you tie the tzitzits onto the beged, because you're not mekayim the mitzvah then. When do you make the bracha? When you go to be mekayim the mitzvah. You take the talis, you're about to put it on, you make a bracha, over lasiyasam, and then you do the atifa and you mekayim the mitzvah. But now let me give you an interesting scenario. Let's say you're wearing a talis, and somebody steps on your tzitzit strings and rips them off in a manner so that now your talis is puzzle. But guess what? You have an extra set of tzitzit strings in your talis bag. So quickly you whip out the tzitzit strings, and you want to go tie them onto the corner of your talis while you're still wearing the talis. Well, that means that right when you finish tying the tzitzits, you're going to be mekayim the mitzvah. So maybe now is an opportunity when I can make a bracha asher kedishanu b'mitzvayis v'tzivanu la'asos tzitzits. Because now with the asiyah of the tzitzits, I'm going to be mekayim the mitzvah. Sounds very catchy. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no, it doesn't work. Says the Mishnah Berurah, let's say your tzitzis strings become torn after you're already wearing them. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Sarich lepashtoi. You immediately have to take the talis off. You're not allowed to wear the talis while you make new tzitzits on it, because every second that you're wearing the talis without proper tzitzis, you're being mevatel mitzvah say daraisa. So you can't be an oiber chacham and say, I want to make a bracha shekin d'shanim b'mitzvaysa b'tzivanu lasois tzitzits and make the tzitzits while the talis is on me. You're not allowed to wear it. So tzarich lepashtai, you have to remove the tzitzits or the talis, v'lasois by tzitzits, and make tzitzits on the garment, or levarich kishachayzer v'loivshay, and then make a new bracha when you put the talis back on. And the Mishnah Berurah says, and that's true, af shaloivshay tekif, even if you're going to put it on immediately. So what's the scenario that the Mechaber is giving you? Again, you were wearing the talis, somebody stepped on your tzitzit strings, he made it puzzle. Says the Mishnah Berurah, don't think you could go put tzitzit strings on when you're wearing the talis. No, you have to remove the talis. Okay, so you removed the talis, you immediately tied new strings on it, and now you want to put it right back on. Do I have to make a new bracha? Maybe not. Maybe there was no hefsek. The only hefsek was the amount of time it took me to make the tzitzits. But that's not even a hefsek. You know why? Because that's tzorchei ha-mitzvah. Tzorchei ha-mitzvah doesn't constitute a hefsek. So maybe I shouldn't make another bracha. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no, you're mechuyev to make another bracha. It's a halacha that we learned all the way in the beginning of the chelik. I touched myself under my shirt collar in a makom mechusa that was malei. It's hot in the room. You saw me turn on the air conditioner before. It's a little bit hot in the room, and I touched myself under my collar where I was very sweaty. I had to pause for a second, and I had to go ahead and wipe my hands with a midi the manaki. I wiped my hands on the desk over here. It's Talmud Torah derabim. I'm not mechuyev to be mafsik and go wash my hands. But in any case, so you would think maybe you don't have to make another bracha. Kamash Malan, the Mishnah Berurah, that no, you have to make another bracha, av shaloiv shay teketh, even though you're immediately going ahead and putting on the talis again, you have to go ahead and make another bracha. Why? Because the talis became puzzle, and now you're putting on the talis again with kosher strings. That constitutes a new mitzvah. So you have to go ahead and you have to make another bracha. Okay. Ois cotton dalad. This is such an interesting siman over here. Ois cotton dalad. The Mechaber told us that the mitzvah of tzitzits, there's no mitzvah on the beged when the beged is hanging in your closet. If the four-cornered beged is hanging in your closet, it doesn't need tzitzits. When you want to wear it, you have to put on tzitzits. When do you make the bracha? Not when you put the tzitzits on, because you're not being mekayim the mitzvah. No, you make the bracha when you go to be mekayim the mitzvah. So when you go to put the talis on, that's when you make the bracha, and right away you put the talis on. The Mishnah Berurah draws a very interesting analogy to another mitzvah, and it's a fascinating topic. Says the Mishnah Berurah, cut and daled, ela b'levi shasai. You're only mekayim the mitzvah when you put on and wear the talis. Says the Mishnah Berurah, for who adin b'mezuzah? This same concept applies to a mezuzah. The kaimalon, because we paskin in the Gemara in Pesachim, chayvas hadarhi. Mezuzah is a chiyuv on the one that lives in the house. What does that mean? The same way by tzitzits we say, it's a chayvas gavra, it's an obligation on the person who's going to wear the talis, and it's not a chayvas mana, it's not a chiyuv on the beged that's in your closet. Same thing applies to a house. Mezuzah is not a chiyuv on the house. If you own a house, but you don't use it, you bought a house, you're not storing anything in it, you're not living in it, you never walked into it, it's vacant, it's empty, you bought it as an investment, you want to flip it. There's no chiyuv of mezuzah on that house. Because it's like a beged of a talis that's in the closet. It's not mechuyev to have tzitzits. This house is sitting in the closet. You're not mechuyev to put mezuzah on it. When you go to live in it, or you go to use it, you start moving stuff into it, now it's chayiv in a mezuzah. But until then, it wasn't chayiv in the mezuzah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, v'hu adin b'mezuzah. The kaimelon we paskin chayvus hadari. The chiyuv is on the one living in the house to put a mezuzah on the house when you live in it. But it's not a chiyuv on the house. Therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah, ein levarich al ha-mezuzah, you don't make a bracha on putting a mezuzah on a house, rak yeshu nichnas loder b'habayis, tekefu miyad. The same way, when do you make a bracha on the talis? When you go to put the talis on, to be mekayim the mitzvah, now you make a bracha. Same thing with a house. When you go to use the house, you're going to go move into the house, you're going to go put stuff in the house, now you make the bracha and you put on the mezuzah. But before that, you don't put on a mezuzah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, da ozhu mamish dumya da atifa. That's similar to atifas talis. You make the bracha when you go to put the talis on. So you make the bracha on the mezuzah when you go to move into the house. Oy kishakvar darba. Or if you have somehow a case where you're already using the house, right? So now you can make a bracha on the mezuzah because you're already living in it. He brings this down from the Birka Yosef, Chaymash B'divrei HaMagen of Rambam, B'chuvas Rabbi Akiva Eiger, B'sayf Siman Tes. Now, the Chuvas Rabbi Akiva Eiger is very, very fascinating. Rabbi Akiva Eiger asks a very interesting kasha on this. He says, you want to draw a comparison between mezuzah and tzitzis? Okay, let's take the comparison all the way. As long as the talis is sitting in the closet, I'm not mechuyev to put tzitzis on it. Okay, as long as the house is sitting vacant, I'm not mechuyev to put a mezuzah on it. I get that. When I want to put the talis on, so right before I put the talis on, I make lehisatev patzitzis. And then I put it on and I'm mekayim the mitzvah. Okay, the house, right before I go to use the house, I make a bracha sheki d'shadu b'mitzvah v'tzivanu l'kpaya mezuzah, and I put a mezuzah on it. And then I go into the house and I'm mekayim the mitzvah. Okay, now let's go further. At the end of davening, what do? I take my talis, I fold it up, I put it back in the bag. What do I do the next morning? I take the talis back out and I make a new bracha. And I put it on again. So wait a second. How about by the house? I make a bracha on the mezuzah, and then what happens if I leave the house? What happens if I move out of the house for a week? I go away for Pesach. It's a very small apartment. I don't really have stuff in the apartment. So I'm not using it as an oitzer either. Maybe a little bit of a far-fetched case, but I left the house. I'm not living in it. Now when I come back, why don't I make another bracha again? Maybe now I should make a bracha, not likbaya mezuzah, because I'm not putting up a new mezuzah, but maybe I should make a bracha, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvaysav etzivanu, lodur b'bayis sheyesh by mezuzah. To live in a house that has a mezuzah. Why are we taking the comparison to tzitzis only so far? Why don't we take it even further? The answer, I think, seems to be, to Rabbi Akiva Eiger's kasha, that there's a difference between the two. The difference is that by tzitzis, every time you go to put on the talis, you're doing a ma'aseh mitzvah. You're actively being mekayim the mitzvah. You're taking the talis and you're wrapping yourself in it. So it passes, it's appropriate to make a new bracha. But by a house, when you come back into the house, you're not putting on the house. You're not doing a ma'aseh mitzvah of living in the house. The only ma'aseh mitzvah that we can identify with mezuzah is the putting up of the mezuzah. There is no other ma'aseh mitzvah that we can identify here. And therefore, what the Chazal were kaveya, no pun intended, is that we make the bracha likbaya mezuzah when we put the mezuzah up. And when do we do that? When we're about to be mekayim the mitzvah. When you're about to start living in the house. That's when you make the bracha, that's when you put the mezuzah up. Okay. Now let's go to Sif Beis. Says the Mechaber. Also talis l'tzarech tachrichin. Let's say you made a talis for a mace. We know we bury a mace in a talis. So you made a talis for a mace. Even though maybe you'll wear that talis during your lifetime at some point, potter. It's a beged of dal kanfais that's potter and tzitzis. Explains the Mishnah Berurah. The Achrayim reach a conclusion that this psak is the daf galudas harush. This is based on the rush. Again, the machlokes, the Rambam and the rush, on how to understand Laila Lavzman Tzitzis. Says the Mishnah Berurah, this psak, that the beged of a mace is pater on tzitzits, is based on the shitas harush. Why? Because this is the rush, the pater la'el b'simin yudches, ksus habiyuchad l'layla afilu b'yoyim. What did the rush say? The rush said Laila Lavzman Tzitzits means a beged Laila, pajamas, a nighttime beged is pater in tzitzits even if you wear it during the day. The similarity, explains the Mishnah Berurah, is the hanami over here also liksus Laila dummy. This beged of a mace is similar to a beged Laila. What's the similarity? Shaharei mace pater mi mitzvahs. A dead person, a mace, has no chiyuv of mitzvahs. The beged of a mace is a beged that's pater. The same way a beged Laila is a beged that's pater. So a beged Laila is a beged that's pater. Therefore, according to the Rush, even if you wear it during the day, it's pater. A beged mace is pater. So even if a chai wears it, it's pater. Avoladas harambam. But according to the Shitas harambam, the mechayiv ksus Laila b'yoyim, the Rambam argues on the Rush. The Rambam holds that the beged Laila is chayiv if you put it on during the day. Therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim, gam bazeh chayiv. So too the beged of the mace is chayiv if a chayiv puts it on. What's interesting over here is that here you have a case where the mechaber is pasking against the Rambam. Usually the mechaber follows the Rambam. Here in this machlokes Rambam and the Rush, the mechaber is following the Rush, not the Rambam. But in any case, says the Chavetz Chaim, lefikach therefore, ledidan, according to us, who wear chayshish for the das of the Rambam, yasa by tzitzits, you should make tzitzits on the beged of the mace if you're going to wear it. V'lo yavarech, but you can't make a bracha because we have to be chayshish for the rush. We don't want to make a bracha of HaTorah. Now we have another interesting halacha. Says the Chavetz Chaim, moichrei habegadim, a clothing salesman, shaloivshin, who puts on a garment, umechavdin, and his kavana is laharois lahakoinim midasa. Somebody is selling jackets, somebody's selling coats, and he wants to wear it so that he could show people what kind of coat it is. He wants them to see, is it a waist-length coat or is it a full-length coat? So why is he wearing the coat? He's wearing the coat not because he wants to wear a coat. He's wearing the coat because he wants to show people midasa. He wants to show them the size. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Peturin. In that case, it's pater from tzitzits. If it would be a four-cornered garment, let's say a talis salesman, so he has short talisim and long talisim. He wants to show off his long talisim, so he's wearing a long talis. It's pater and tzitzits, because that his kavana is not levisha. And again, what do we see here? We see that the chiyuv of tzitzis is on the levisha. He's not doing a levisha. Now, gives the Mishnah Berurah an interesting exception. Let's say there's a law that you have to pay a tax on the garment that you're selling, but a garment of yours that you're wearing is pater from the tax. So let's say the salesman puts on the garment, so you should be exempt from the tax. In that case, the Mishnah Berurah says it's possible that beged is chayiv in tzitzits, the same way we find that if that beged would be shotness, you wouldn't be allowed to wear it if you were doing it lahaveres hameches. What's the difference between the two cases? Very, very interesting what the difference over here is. Again, we have one case which is a salesman. He is wearing the beged to show people the size of the beged, pater from tzitzis. The next case, he's wearing the beged. Again, he's not wearing it because he's not wearing it because he wants to wear it. He's wearing it lahaveres hameches. In that case, the Mishnah Berurah says it's possible that it's chayiv in tzitzis. What's the nafkamina? Very fascinating. I've looked into this. It's based on a Magen Avram. The Magen Avram is based on a Taisus in Nida. The Taisus in Nida is based on a stira contradiction between two Mishnayos in the Masechtas Klayim. One Mishnah in Masechtas Klayim says that a salesman who's wearing a garment to show off the garment, pater in Klayim. There's no problem of shatnez. Okay? Explain the Rishonim. We paskin like the famous Rav Shimon. Rav Shimon holds davar she'einu miskaven is pater. This is a davar she'einu miskaven. I have no kavanah to be wearing the beged. The Isser of Klayim is to wear shatnez. I have no kavanah to wear the shatnez. So we paskin like Reb Shimon, and the Mishnah says, no problem, it's potter. Comes along another Mishnah in Klayim. You wear the beged lahaveres hameches, that's a problem, that's Klayim. All right. The Rishonim look at these two Mishnayos, the Rosh and the Rash, they come along and they say, oh, it's a stira between two Mishnayos, it is a contradiction, it must be a machlokes tanoim. This Mishnah that says that you're potter on Klayim if you're a salesman and you're showing off the beged is one Tana. The next Mishnah that says that lahavre sameches you're chayiv in Klayim is a different Tana. No, Tanoim are allowed to argue with each other. The two Mishnayos are machlokes tanoim. Very nice. Problem is the Rambam. The Rambam paskins like both Mishnahs. So if it's two different Tanoim that argue on each other, how could the Rambam paskin like both of them? He paskins that the salesman is potter. He patters that the guy who's avoiding the tax is chayiv. So what's pshat in the Rambam? Comes along the Beis Yosef. The Beis Yosef says, I'll tell you pshat in the Rambam. Pshat in the Rambam is that there's a major difference between both cases. The Rambam held that even Reb Shimon, who holds that a davar she'eina miskaven is potter, the Rambam would agree that lahavres hameches is chayiv because it's not called a davar she'eina miskaven. Why? So let's take a look at these two cases. The salesman who's showing off the garment, does he have any kavanah for levisha? Does he want to wear the garment in any way, shape, or form? No. All he wants to do is advertise his wares. So that's not levisha. Potter and Klayim, potter and tzitzis. Lahaviris hameches is different. Why is he wearing it? He's wearing it to avoid a tax. Why does he avoid the tax by wearing it? Because the law is a beged that you are wearing is potter in the meches. So that means that he does have kavanah to wear it. He wants to say, look, this is my beged that I'm wearing. And that's why he wants to be potter. So that's a kavanah for levisha. If it's a kavanah for levisha, chayiv and Klayim, chayiv and tzitzis. Now, of course, you're not allowed to avoid the meches. If it's dinah de balchusa, you're not allowed to go against the law. If the law of the land requires you to pay the tax, you're required to pay the tax. And you're not allowed to go make a shtick and go put on the garment to avoid the tax. So it has to be, we're talking about a case where somehow it's halachically permissible. Okay. Weiter. Now we go to Siman Chaf. We're going a little bit long again, but I'm not stopping. I'm keeping on going. Says the Mechaber, Sif Chaf, Dine Likichas u'Mechiras Talis, the halachas that govern the purchase and sales of talisim, u'Boibei Seifim, and here we have two Seifim. Sif Aleph. Now let's remember, we learned a halacha earlier that tzitzits have to be made lishmah. They have to be made l'shem mitzvah tzitzits. What does that mean? That means that the tzitzit strings, the threads that make up the tzitzit strings, have to be spun l'shem mitzvah tzitzits. We need shizira lishmah. We need that when we twist the multiple strands, we paskin that we need shizira lishmah. When you take the tzitzit and you put them into the beged, we need that to be done lishmah also. The knots have to be tied lishmah. The coils have to be made lishmah. So we need lishmah by tzitzits. Well, that means that who you buy your tzitzits from is critical. You have to know what they prepared lishmah. So, says the Mechaber Sif Aleph, Halikeach talis mitzuyetzets mi Yisrael. Somebody buys a talis with tzitzits on it from a yid. Oy mitagar goy. Or he buys it from an Eino Yehudi who is a professional tagar. He's not just some guy on the street who happens to be selling talisim. No, he's a professional. He's an uman. He's a shopkeeper. And he has a business. And he's selling talisim as part of his business. And the Ramah says, V'oimer, and this Eino Yehudi tagar says, Shalakachan mi Yisrael, and here again we have two different ways you could possibly read this Ramah. Either the Ramah says, the Eino Yehudi says, Shalakachan, that he purchased this talis with the tzitzits, mi Yisrael Neman, from a trustworthy yid. Or, V'aymer, and the Eino Yehudi says, Shalakachan mi Yisrael, that he purchased the talis from a yid, and a Yid is trusted, Neman, the Eina Yehudi is trusted to say he bought it from a Yid. In either case, says the Mechaber, what's the halacha here? Kishera. This talis is kosher. So you went ahead, you bought a talis from a Yid, or you bought a talis from an Eina Yehudi. But the Eina Yehudi tells you, listen, I bought this talis from a Yid. In either way, in either case, the talis is kosher, and you are allowed to assume that it was made lishmah. You bought it from a Yid, the Yid has nemanus, he's selling you a talis with tzitzis on it. Zikr, it was made lishmah. You bought it from the Eina Yehudi, the Eina Yehudi told you I bought it from a Yid. So okay, Mistam, it was done lishmah, kshera. And explains the Mechaber, why is the Eina Yehudi trusted? The Yid, he's a Yid, he has a cheskes kashrus. Eid echad neman be'isurin. You're allowed to trust an Eid echad when it comes to isurin. He's telling you that it's a kosher talis, it's a kosher talis. But how about the Eina Yehudi? What kind of nemanis does the Eina Yehudi have? Why are you allowed to trust him? Says the Mechaber, the kevam de tagarhu, since he's a professional shopkeeper, he's got a business to protect. Chazaka shalakacham Yisrael. There's a chazaka that what he's telling you is the truth, that he bought it from Yid, to loymara nafshe, because he's not going to risk his business. To loymara nafshe, he's not going to weaken himself. It means he's not risking his business. He's not going to do funny business by selling you tzitzits that are not good and risk his business. He's going to get a reputation that he's a shyster. No one's going to buy any of the Judaic items from him anymore. But if you bought it from an Eina Yehudi who's not a professional, some guy in the street, psula, then it's possible because you can't give him any namanas. You can't trust him. I don't know where his talis came from. I don't know where these strings came from. Maybe the non-Jew, somebody taught him how to make talisim and make tzitzits. Maybe once upon a time he had a job working for a Yid, and there was a Yid Oymen al Gabav instructing him to make it lishmah. But now he went out on his own. He's a freelancer. So now he's doing it on his own without Yisrael Oymen al Gabav. And even if he says he's doing it lishmah, it doesn't mean anything. He needs Yisrael Oymen al Gabav. So now there's no nemanas, and therefore it's possible. Says the Mishnah Berurah. Aiskan Aleph, Mi Yisrael. Let's say you bought the talis from a Yid. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Afilu ein makir oisai. Even if you don't know the Yid, you bought a talis with tzitzis, you bought a talis with strings on it from a Yid, but Afilu ein makir oisai shu kosher v'neman. You're not mechuyev to know the guy and know that he's trustworthy. He's a Yid, he has a cheskes kashrus. Afilu hachi talinan d'stam Yisrael b'cheskes kosher. He has a cheskes kashrus. Ubevadai tfanu shizaran utlan lishman. And if he's selling it to you, he zecher did the spinning and the twisting and the inserting the strings onto the garment lishma. Im loishahu chashud, unless he's a Yid that for some reason you chayshid him. But if you have no reason to be chayshid him, then he has a cheskes kashrus. Uklalei chashud, and there's no such thing that, well, I decided I'm chayshid him. No, you're not allowed to be chayshid a Yid. You're only allowed to be chayshid a Yid if there's halachic reason that he should be chashud. Like the Mishnah Berurah says, "Klali chashud." I'm Yeridei and Kufyotes. In Yeridei we have halachas who's chashud. You're not just chashud somebody. So if you buy the talis with tzitzis on it from a Yid, you're allowed to rely on the fact that it's kosher, because the Yid is a cheskes kashrus. Now, how about if you bought it from an Eina Yehudi, ice cut base, tagar guy, or you brought it from a professional Eina Yehudi? Afilo Eina musik liknais talisais. Even if he doesn't have a chazaka, we don't know that he buys and sells talisais. Rak musik liknais shars chayrais. He's a professional shopkeeper that we buy household items from. He's not a Judaica dealer. He's not a professional Judaica dealer. Afilo achi neman. He's still trusted. Because if we find out that he's a liar on one thing, if we find out that he was lying about the tzitzits, we're not going to trust him about the pots and pans that they're really stainless steel either. Say, well, he lied about the tzitzits, he lied about the pots and pans. So even if this Eina Yehudi Tagar is a hardware store guy, we can still trust him on the tzitzits. Ice cut Gimel, Mi Yisrael Neman. The Eina Yehudi Tagar says that he purchased the talis with the tzitzits from a Yid. Ayin b'lavush. The Mishnah Berurah says, take a look at the lavush. The muchach minei, it's clear from the words of the Hush, she'ein tzarech hatager loymar shekana minema. The tager does not actually have to make a verbal statement and say, here, I have a talis with tzitzis for sale. You should know I bought it from a trustworthy yid. From the Levush it comes out that that's not what the Ramah means. V'omer shalakachan miYisrael neman. That the Ein Yehudi tager has to actually say that he bought it from Yisrael neman. Ta'afilu mistam Yisrael. Even if he says, I bought it from a yid. He doesn't have to say, I bought it from a trustworthy yid. I brought it from a yid. Kosher, it's kosher. K'may b'Yisrael, shekana miYisrael. The same way you go to a yid and you buy a talis with tzitzis on it from a yid, and he says, I didn't make it, but I bought it from another yid. He doesn't have to say, I bought it from a yid who's neman. Every yid menastam is neman. He's a kaskas kashrus. V'chein mashma mishar achronim. Ve'efsher, and the Mishnah Berurah says it's possible. The Gama Ramah Sefer came. They're not arguing on the Ramah. You could read the Ramah that way, like I told you earlier. V'tevas nemon, the word nemon, kai al hatagar, it goes on the shopkeeper. In other words, read it like this. You, oimi tagar goy, you bought the talis from an Eina Yehudi shopkeeper, the oimer, and the Eina Yehudi shopkeeper says, shalekachan mi Yisrael, that he bought it from a yid, kama, nemon. The Eina Yehudi tager is trusted to say that he bought it from a yid. But he doesn't have to say that he bought it from a yid who he knows is trustworthy. He just has to say that he bought it from a yid. Any yid is trustworthy unless he's a chashud. So what's the Ramah coming to add? Laharais lanu, to tell us hasvara the dafka al diburoi samchinon uma'aminon loi, that the shopkeeper has to actually say that he bought it from a yid, and that's what we're trusting him on. Why do we trust the shopkeeper? Because he can't afford to lie. Because if he lies, he's endangering his business. But if you don't ask him anything, if you just go to the shelf and you take the talis, bring it to the counter and pay for it and walk out, he didn't lie. Even if you go to him later and you say, did you buy that from a Jew? And he says, no, I made it myself. I didn't lie. You never asked me. So he has to make a statement that he bought it from a yid. That's what the Ramah is coming to say in the parentheses. V'omer shalakachan mi Yisrael. He has to say that he bought it from a yid. But he doesn't have to say that he bought it from a yid who's a neman. But if he doesn't say anything at all, then he didn't risk his business because he never lied, he never said anything. Okay. Ois cotton dalid. So we said we could trust the Eina Yehudi who's a tagar to loy mara nafshe, because he's not going to endanger his business. He's not going to endanger his credibility. To loy mara, he's not going to weaken nafshe, himself, meaning his credibility. Ois Cotton Dal says the Mishnah Berurah, to loy mara nafshe. Ayin the Magen Avraham, he says, take a look at the Magen Avraham Shakasav, writes, Dafka gabi talis b'tzitzi yoseha samchinon al sfarazu um'aminaloi. When is this halacha true? What did the Mechaber say? Haloikeach talis mitzuyetzes. You bought a talis with tzitzits on it. So says the Magen Avraham, this halacha only applies when you bought a talis that has tzitzits on it. Why? Because now there's two reasons why you could trust him. First of all, mishum de'ein darech l'nachri litlois tzitzits bebigdoi. What are you worried about? You're worried that the non-Jew made the tzitzits himself? Is that common? It's not normal that a non-Jew should be tying tzitzits onto a beggar. So that's the first reason why you don't have to worry that the Eina Yehudi put on the tzitzits himself and did it shaloi lishmah. Because how many Eina Yehudim do you know who make tzitzits? And then the second svara is the loymar nafshe. He's also not going to risk his credibility. So says the Magen Avraham, you need both of those ingredients in order to trust the Eina Yehudi. Ingredient number one is that what you're buying from him is a talis mitzuyetzes. You're buying a talis that has strings already on it. So now there's raglayim l'davar that it must have been made by a yid, because an Eina Yehudi doesn't normally make tzitzits. Ingredient number two is the one that Mechaber spells out, the loymar nafshe, that he has to say that he got it from a yid, and you could trust him because he won't risk his credibility because he's a tager, he's a professional shopkeeper. Aval, however, continues the Chofetz Chaim, liknois tzitzis, to buy tzitzis strings, asar af min hatagar. You're not allowed to buy tzitzis strings even from a professional shopkeeper. Why? Because then we have to be chayshish. Look, tzitzis strings are only strings. Maybe he made them for bakery string. Maybe he made them for goyim to use to tie up their recycling boxes. So goyim do make string. So I have to worry that maybe it was done shaloi lishmah. However, there are those who are makel. Mutter the Artzis Achayim, the Yeshuas Yaakov, they say that if this tager is a Judaica dealer, and this is his business to buy and sell tzitzit strings, then you could trust him. Because then he's a professional tzitzit string salesman. So he's not going to endanger his business. So again, the takeaway from this ice cut and dalet is that the Bechaber says this halacha applies when you're buying a talis mitzuyetzes. Because then the Magen Avraham says there's a double reason to trust the guy. One is there's reglayim l'davar, because goyim don't make tzitzits. The second factor is that he tells you he bought it from a yid, and he has the manos because he's a tager. But if you want to buy tzitzit strings from him, then you don't have the first ingredient. You don't have that first ingredient that a goy doesn't make strings. Goyim do make strings. Now, the raya of the Magen Avraham that this is true is because we don't find that we use this svara of Deloy Mara Nafshe on all Isurim. Are you allowed to buy meat from a non-Jew who says, yeah, I bought it from a Yid who shechted it? No, he has no namanas. Why? Why don't we say Deloy Mara Nafshe? No, because Goyim slaughter animals and sell meat. So to over here, strings, Goyim make strings. So you can't trust him to say that these are tzitzis strings that were made lishmah. Okay, finally, I know we're going very long. I'm sorry. Thank you for bearing with me. One more. Ice cut and hay. Psula, the Bechaber said, but to purchase tzitzis strings from a non-professional, Eino Yehudi shopkeeper, some bloke that you met on the street who's just selling tzitzits, him you cannot buy a talis mitzuyetzes from and trust him. Says the Mishnah Berurah, it's funny that he first mentions it now, what's the chashash? Shemahu ba'atzman asat tzitzis ba'abeged. Because without the additional nemonis that he's a professional shopkeeper, we have to worry that maybe he made the talis himself. He tied on the strings himself. That's not normal, but it could be. And he's not a professional shopkeeper, so he has no nemonis. The choshkein, the also likleis b'men tzitzits. Certainly, you wouldn't be allowed to purchase tzitzit strings from him. The shema loy nitva lishmah, because maybe the threads were not spun lishmah. Limkain, if so, says the Mishnah Berurah, pashit, it is obvious that afilu im yirtza lahatira mehabeged or lakashra mechadash. In these cases where you can't trust the one you're buying it from, you can't even buy it, untie the tzitzits, and then retie them onto the beged, because you don't know that the strings were spun lishmah. Aser, that would be aser. Continues the Chofetz Chaim after the brackets. Matzah talis b'tziyetzes pashuk. Let's say in the street you found a talis with tzitzits on it. Kosher, it's kosher. V'aser l'shlayach tzitzis. You're not allowed to buy somebody. You want to give him a gift. You're not allowed to send tzitzis to somebody. Afilu psukin or shazurin. You want to send somebody a beautiful gift of tzitzit strings, even if they're already cut and prepared and everything. You're not allowed to send it al yidei ovid galulim, through a non-Jew, just like basar shenesalim min ayin. If you own a restaurant and you're sending a meat sandwich through Uber Eats, it has to have shtei chasimas. It has to have 2 seals on it. Otherwise, v'chayshik that the guy swapped it out. Tzitzit strings, you want to send them with an Eini Yehudi, they also need shtei chasimas. Otherwise, we can't be sure that they are tzitzits that were made lishmah. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah, especially for going a little overtime here. The schos of limud HaTorah should be made against Klal Yisrael. The Baruch should say Yeshua for first Parnasa and Shidduchim to all those in need, and we should be Zaycha to the B'yas Tzedek. B'mher v'yameinu. Amen. Be well.